I am Eleanor Hayes, and I am 76 years old. I am sitting here in my familiar living room, where the June afternoon sunlight gently falls through the large windows, drawing golden streaks of light on the old wooden floor. The gentle scent of roses from the small garden outside drifts in, reminding me of distant memories of peaceful afternoons long gone. I gently stroke the unfinished wool blanket on my lap, my old eyes squinting towards the lush green garden, where every branch and flower bush is carefully tended. This two-story house on Oakwood Drive is not simply a property, but a part of my flesh and blood, a shelter, a crystallization of years of hardship, of the silent love I have for Daniel, my only son. I still remember clearly the day I first held the keys to this house in my hand, a bright afternoon in the summer of 1987. I was only 38 years old then, standing in front of the emerald green door, my hands shaking as I held the shiny set of keys. Daniel, a 13-year-old boy, held my hand tightly, his clear eyes shining with indescribable joy. "Mommy, we have a home!" he cried out clearly. That sound still echoes in my mind as if it were yesterday. "Yes, honey, this is our home, a safe place, a place where you can grow up without fear of lacking anything." I promised him with all my trust and hope. 38 years. That's how much time I spent cultivating every corner of this house. Every brick, every curtain, every picture on the wall is imbued with my traces, a single woman constantly trying to build a proper home. I once thought this would be the place where I would live for the rest of my life, next to Daniel, next to irreplaceable memories. But no one can predict all the twists and turns in life. And now, my own son, my own flesh and blood, wants to push me out of this house, as if I were an old thing, a burden. I let out a sigh, the sadness of old age seeping into every fiber of my being. There was once a strong and indomitable Eleanor Hayes. I was a stocker in a large department store, a job that wasn't prestigious but was enough to raise my son after my unfaithful husband left me with a cruel curse. "You'll never get ahead, Eleanor. You and the boy will crawl back to me begging." I laughed coldly. He was wrong. I didn't want to depend on any man ever again. I worked tirelessly from early morning until late at night. Every penny I earned, I carefully packed. But I didn't stop there. I studied. I borrowed books from the library, devoured books on finance, markets, and investments. When Daniel fell asleep, I sat quietly by the desk lamp, diligently analyzing charts and studying numbers. I started investing small from my meager savings. No one knew, not even Daniel. My child only needed a strong mother, not to know about the silent sacrifices. I would rather be looked down upon for my simple lifestyle than be taken advantage of again. And I did it. I quietly accumulated enough assets to live peacefully for the rest of my life. But I still chose to live simply, avoiding all ostentation. Because for me, this house is more than just a shelter. It is my fortress, a symbol of the independence that I have shed blood and tears to build. I stood up slowly and walked to the window that overlooked the familiar Oakwood Drive. A new silver SUV had just pulled up in front of the house. My son, Daniel, now 51, got out, followed by his wife, Patricia, who was about 48. They didn't look up at the house. Not a single glance was directed toward the window where I was standing. They hurried in, as if this were just a rented hotel, not the home their mother-in-law had spent her life maintaining. I remember thinking, this is not my home anymore. This is Daniel and Patricia's home. But I kept quiet. I was afraid of hurting my son, and that was the biggest mistake of my life. I gave too much, loved until I was exhausted, and hid what I needed to say. It was that blind sacrifice that nurtured a selfish, heartless Daniel. I watched them enter the house, the door slamming shut behind them, closing a bitter chapter in my life. A new journey, a journey of a mother facing the betrayal of her most beloved child, began at that moment. I took a deep breath, holding my aching heart, and I told myself, Eleanor, you have survived so many storms and still stand. You will not fall. Never. When my husband left, he left behind a bitter mess and a curse. You will never rise again, Eleanor. Alone with the baby, you will soon be crawling back to me begging. But he was wrong. Even though my heart felt like it was being torn into a million pieces, I still held on to one iron conviction. I would never allow myself to depend on anyone again, especially not a man. I swore that to myself, and that oath became an unshakable compass for the rest of my life. At that time, I was only 38 years old, raising Daniel alone in difficult circumstances. Life was really hard. The modest salary from my job as a stocker in a large department store was just enough to cover the minimum expenses. Every morning, I woke up before the first light of the sun, prepared breakfast for Daniel, and rushed to work. At night, after a long day of exhausting myself with numbers and bills, I threw myself into housework, taking care of the child, making sure he had a hot meal and a clean bed to sleep in. I had no time to complain or be sad. I had only one goal: to give Daniel a decent life, and I myself would never have to bow down to anyone. In a small, shabby office tucked away at the back of the store, where the receipts were stacked so high they blocked out the light, I began my journey to rebuild my life. I scribbled away in an old ledger, my eyes tired, but never lacking determination. On the cluttered desk, among the scraps of paper and frayed files, were several books on investing in stocks. One of them, How to Make $100, became my bedside book. I read it not just with my eyes, but with my mind, page by page, line by line, as if it were a salvation. I didn't read for fun. I read to escape my confinement. Occasionally, the shop owner would come in, put a new stack of bills on the table, and say, Eleanor, you're doing a great job, but could you hurry up a bit? The deadline is approaching. I would always reply calmly, Yes, sir, I'll do my best. I never once complained, because I knew that every hour I worked, every penny I saved was a brick building the wall of my own freedom and dignity. In the evening, when Daniel had fallen asleep, I sat quietly under the dim yellow desk lamp, continuing to read and analyze financial charts. I learned how to identify mutual funds, how to read stock indexes, understand risks and opportunities. I started making small investments from the little savings I had accumulated. At first, it was just a few modest numbers, but I put my faith in perseverance and the power of long-term accumulation. I didn't tell anyone, especially Daniel. My son didn't need to know. The only thing he needed was a strong mother, someone who could protect him with hands that never let go. I'd rather let people think I was a simple mother than let someone take advantage of me. I still remember one time when Daniel was little, he innocently asked, How much money do you have saved, Mom? I smiled and replied softly, Just enough to get by. Don't worry about me. His eyes then shone with relief and a bit of contempt. He thought his mother was someone who only knew how to save every penny, incapable of getting rich. But I would rather be despised than be taken advantage of again. The emotional trauma caused by my ex-husband made me so defensive that it gradually created an isolation in my relationship with my son. I didn't want anyone to know about what I had accumulated because it was my shield, my pride, my silent weapon. As time went on, each small investment began to pay off. I continued to learn, and I continued to invest carefully but wisely. I didn't take blind risks, but I was always ready to seize opportunities. Over the years, my assets gradually increased, far beyond what anyone around me could have imagined. I became a wealthy woman, but I still maintained a simple, private lifestyle. I continued to go to work, still cleaned the house, still accompany Daniel. This house on Oakwood Drive, to me, was more than just a place to live. It was a fortress, a symbol of the independence and self-reliance that I had built with sweat, tears, and unyielding perseverance. The financial secrecy made Daniel grow up feeling lacking, at least materially, even though I always gave him the utmost love. Daniel grew up with the image of a hard-working but not well-off mother. He never asked more deeply, never wondered how I managed to keep us together over the years. He only saw one image, a poor but hard-working mother, an image that I had unconsciously created. And that image, over the years, gradually became the foundation for Daniel's contempt, deep misunderstandings, and even wrong decisions later on. I did not realize that my overprotection had unintentionally built a cold wall between me and my son. I thought I was keeping my son away from the burden of money, but in reality, I was depriving him of the opportunity to understand and appreciate all the things I had been through. My life continued to flow quietly with long, regular days and hidden secrets until one afternoon, Daniel, my son, now a 46-year-old man, entered my life in a completely different way. We met at a familiar small coffee shop where I often went to find some peace. Daniel appeared with an unusual cheerfulness, holding the hand of a graceful, elegant woman. It was Patricia. She was about 43 years old, dressed fashionably, always smiling, but there was something in her eyes that made me uneasy, as if behind that sweet shell was a layer of calculating fog. "Mom, this is Patricia. We just got married last week," Daniel said, his voice as excited as a child showing off a new toy. I was stunned. Daniel had never spoken seriously about Patricia, let alone about the wedding. A vague sense of loss passed through me, but I tried to smile, hiding the emotions that were stirring in my chest. "Oh, Daniel, why didn't you tell me sooner?" I said, trying to keep my tone calm. Patricia quickly added, her smile gentle but her eyes piercing. "We wanted to surprise you. Daniel told me a lot about you." I replied politely. "Really? I'm so glad to meet you, Patricia." But inside, an ominous feeling was creeping in like a cold mist. A few weeks later, one quiet evening in the old living room, Daniel and Patricia sat across from me on the worn sofa. Daniel looked puzzled, his eyes flicking to Patricia as if waiting for approval. "Mom, I have something to tell you," he said a little hesitantly. "Patricia and I are looking for a house, but the prices are really high." I fell silent, my hunch correct. Something was brewing. "Is that so? It's hard," I said, trying to keep my composure. Patricia spoke up then, her voice as soft as honey. "Aunt Eleanor, we thought we might as well move here temporarily to save up for a place of our own. We promise not to bother you. Daniel will fix the broken things in the house, and I will cook you delicious meals." Her words were sugar-coated, but I could clearly feel the soft trap hidden in each word. I had lived long enough to know that temporarily sometimes meant forever. I looked at Daniel, my son, who was looking at me with the same pleading eyes I had seen so many times when he was little. Daniel was my everything. I loved him with everything I had, and it was that love, along with the hope that this was just a stepping stone to a new beginning, that made me ignore the worries whispering inside me. "Temporarily? Fine, as long as you're comfortable," I sighed, accepting the offer. Immediately, Daniel exclaimed like a child receiving a gift. "Thanks, Mom. You're the best." That bright smile softened my heart. I thought to myself, maybe I was thinking too much. At first, things went surprisingly smoothly. Daniel began fixing the cracks around the house. The leaky roof was patched, the leaky faucets were replaced, the creaky doors were carefully oiled. Patricia was also in the kitchen, cooking delicious meals. The aromas filled the house, bringing with them a warmth that seemed long gone. In the evenings, we watched movies together, talked, and laughter echoed in the house that had once been my only home. I felt like time was turning back, as if old age was retreating before the family atmosphere I had found. I thought, yeah, maybe I'm worrying too much. Daniel was still my little boy, and Patricia, she seemed so kind, but that temporary lasted for 5 years. Little by little, I began to notice the unspoken changes. Patricia quietly rearranged the house, at first just moving a vase, changing the position of a painting. "This vase fits better in this corner, don't you think?" she said sweetly, and I just smiled and nodded. But it was those small changes that made me feel like ownership was slipping away from me. My familiar objects gradually disappeared, old but memory-filled items, pushed aside to make room for new furniture. Even the books I had cherished like treasures, the pages that had guided me through difficult years, were moved to the attic without a word. I began to feel like a guest in my own home. I remember that feeling so clearly, the moment of realization. This is not my home anymore. This is Daniel and Patricia's home. But I said nothing. I didn't want him to be sad. And that, perhaps, was the biggest mistake of my life. I gave too much, loved too much, and kept too many secrets. That created a greedy, heartless Daniel, the one I still try to protect with everything that's left of my heart. At first, the changes were subtle, as insignificant as the wisps of smoke drifting through the window. But over time, they became as obvious and blatant as the zigzag cracks that crept across the old wall, signaling an inevitable collapse. I still remember that afternoon, searching for the family photo album on the familiar bookshelf. I still remember its location, right next to the classic novels I had read over and over again. I muttered to myself, "Strange, where did the family album go?" Just then, Patricia walked into the living room, holding a modern ceramic vase, placing it in the place where the antique glass vase, a gift from my mother, was supposed to be. "Oh, I put that old vase away," Patricia said lightly, her voice cold as if she were referring to a discarded object. "It looks so old-fashioned. This vase matches the color of the living room better." A feeling of unease crept into my chest. I tried to keep my voice calm. "But that's my keepsake." Patricia laughed, a faint smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I understand, Eleanor, but we should also modernize a bit, right, Daniel?" Daniel sat on the sofa, eyes glued to the phone screen, not bothering to look up. "Yes, it looks nice, Mom." That thoughtless sentence was like a thin knife stabbing into my heart. I suddenly felt lost. From then on, the changes began to pile up. No longer small things, but intentional deletions. My old photos, the moments that marked a lifetime, memories of Daniel as a little boy in my arms, were gradually replaced by glossy wedding photos of Daniel and Patricia, or lavish trips that I had never been a part of. The living room, once filled with laughter, memories, and warmth, was now cold and unfamiliar, reflecting Patricia's aesthetic more than a home. I was a lost shadow in the very home I had built. But the biggest blow came when they started touching my garden. My beloved rose garden, where I used to spend my afternoons meticulously tending to it, where I found myself in nature, finding a little peace in the hustle and bustle of life, was now part of the renovation plans that Daniel and Patricia were preparing. One afternoon, as I was watering the budding roses, Daniel and Patricia approached, blueprints in hand. "Mom, Pat and I talked," Daniel said, beaming. "We're planning on building a modern barbecue area here. It'll be so convenient, Mom." I was stunned. "What about your flower garden? You put all your heart into it." Patricia smiled gently, but her words were cold and hard. "Auntie Eleanor, everyone has roses. A barbecue is a necessity for gathering with friends. And you're old. Why bother keeping a garden?" The words hit me like a slap. It wasn't just the garden. They were taking away the things I loved. the parts that made me who I was. A dull pain seeped into every cell. A few days later, the rumble of the excavators and the drills began. My garden was being destroyed without mercy. And then the biggest shock came. One morning, I woke up to find Patricia rearranging the furniture in my bedroom. She didn't knock, didn't ask, just acted like it was her room all along. I stared at the scene, dumbfounded. Aunt Eleanor, I've discussed it with Uncle Daniel, she said, her voice laced with false kindness. You should move to a small room on the first floor. It's healthier and easier to get around. If anything happens, we can take care of it. I couldn't believe my ears. I'm still fine, Patricia. I don't need to move anywhere. But she kept her cool. You're thinking about your health first. The room upstairs is cold at night. I'm afraid you'll catch a cold. I protested, but Daniel sided with her. You go down there. We can take care of you if anything happens. The words sounded caring, but they were cold and distant. I was forced to move to a small room near the kitchen and shared bathroom, even though I was still physically and mentally fit. The old room, where I had spent so many long nights, had been renovated by Patricia into their master bedroom, filled with new furniture, the colors so foreign that it made me feel suffocated. I sat in the small room, looking at the cold white walls, with not a single thing that reminded me of myself. Everything familiar had been replaced. A thought echoed in my head. This is no longer my home. This is Daniel and Patricia's home. But I didn't say it. I didn't want to upset my son. That was the biggest mistake of my life. From the day I moved to the first floor, the unspoken rules began to tighten. I was not allowed to make any noise after 10 p.m., not allowed to use the kitchen late at night, not allowed to leave personal belongings in the common area. I was no longer allowed to make a cup of hot tea every night, not allowed to turn on the radio in the living room. Every move I made had to be gentle, as stealthy as a thief in my own house. I became a silent shadow, a tenant in the house I had spent my whole life with. The feeling of being rejected, of being deprived of my right to exist, grew inside me. But I remained silent, still told myself to endure for Daniel's sake, because I wanted to believe that my son still loved me. I was afraid of damaging that fragile bond, but deep down, I knew that something had changed forever. My life in my own home gradually became a series of heavy days, thick with the feeling of being suffocated and violated. The unspoken rules, Patricia's meaningful scrutiny, and Daniel's indifference little by little pushed me towards the darkness. I was like a silent shadow, gradually being erased. But what hurt me deeply and kept me in a state of alert was the naked invasion into my remaining little private world. One afternoon, I returned from the garden, once a peaceful place, now a cold, empty lot. The door to my room was slightly ajar, which was unusual because I always kept it closed. As I entered, my heart stopped. Patricia was standing in the middle of the room, holding a familiar little notebook. It was the notebook that recorded the investments I had quietly accumulated over the years, each line a private secret I had carefully kept. The tightness in my chest almost made me suffocate. "What are you doing in my room, Patricia?" I asked, my voice cold and sharp as a knife. Patricia jumped as if she had been caught, hurriedly hiding the notebook behind her back, forcing a crooked smile. "Oh, Aunt Eleanor, I was looking for the TV remote. It must have fallen somewhere in your room." A clumsy lie. I looked straight into her eyes, not hiding the contempt in my gaze. "You were rummaging through my things, weren't you?" Her face paled. The smile disappeared, but she still tried to deny it. "What are you talking about? I didn't do anything." From that day on, I began locking my door whenever I left, despite their protests. Daniel claimed that I didn't trust my family, and Patricia blatantly accused me of hiding something. During a heavy dinner, Daniel spoke up, his voice carrying a vague reproach. "Mom, why did you lock your room? Don't you trust me and Patricia?" I replied softly, "Mom, I just need some privacy, Daniel." Patricia interjected, her voice full of innuendo. "Privacy? Or is there something you're hiding from us? We're a family. Why are we so secretive?" I didn't respond. Silence was the veil I used to hide my assets, and the deeper fear that if they knew how much I owned, they wouldn't call it privacy. They'd call it ownership. Gradually, my living space became suffocatingly narrow. The old books I cherished, the antique tea set my mother left me, every memento imbued with memories, all were neatly put away or given away by Patricia, making room for the flashy cold items she called modern. "Why do you keep those antiques cluttering up the house?" she said, and Daniel remained silent, as if it were completely normal. I felt every piece of my life being torn out, thrown into oblivion, replaced by a present I did not belong to. I became wary of everything. I kept meticulous records, hid valuables, and buried bitter feelings under a mask of calm. My financial secrets became more and more closely guarded. I didn't want anyone to know how rich I really was, especially after what had happened. I kept a straight face, but inside, the building blocks of a secret plan were being laid. I was left out of conversations. Meals were now just a time for me to sit quietly and be a silent listener. Daniel and Patricia talked about travel plans, parties, future plans, never once asking for my opinion, not even inviting me to join. I sat there, silent as a shadow clinging to the wall, listening, memorizing every word. In this very house, I became a stranger. And then, the day that marked a milestone in my life, my 75th birthday, was the peak of pain. I sat alone in my room, staring out the window, listening to the laughter from the living room where Daniel and Patricia were watching TV. I had prepared myself for silence, but why did it still hurt so much? Not a single greeting, not a single word of remembrance. 75 years of life, and they forgot me. Who was I in this house? A mother, or a shadow, or a burden? The pain was dull, the shame was forgotten, and a quiet anger was burning in my heart. I had given everything, and what I received in return was ingratitude, coldness, and exclusion. I thought I had sacrificed everything for Daniel, but perhaps it was that blind sacrifice that created a person who did not know how to appreciate. I was too weak, and now I know it is time to change. I cannot continue to endure. After that heartbreakingly lonely 75th birthday, I knew I couldn't take it another day. I told myself enough is enough. The feelings of self-pity and the dull pain in my heart had quietly crystallized into a flame of anger, burning in my heart like red ashes under the ashes. I needed an escape, a wake-up call, and the first person who came to mind was Sophie, my best friend for decades. Sophie was a brave, sharp, and straightforward woman, someone who could see through everything without blinding emotions. We met at a familiar little cafe, a place that had been associated with many peaceful old age memories. I told Sophie everything that was happening in that house, from Patricia blatantly changing everything, destroying the garden I had cherished, to the story of me being pushed down to a small room on the first floor. I told her about the unspoken rules, the cold looks, and even the birthday that was deliberately forgotten as if I had never existed. "Sophie, I feel like an extra in my own home," I said, my voice choking. "They changed everything, from my mother's vase to my rose bed. Now I'm relegated to a tiny room on the first floor, like an old piece of furniture stuck in a corner." Sophie put down her coffee cup, her eyes flashing at me sharply, not hiding any anger. "Eleanor, you can't go on like this. This is your home. You have the right. They're treating you like an object, something that can be moved, thrown away at any time. You're not some mindless doll for them to manipulate. Sophie's words were a painful but necessary slap. It woke me up. But he's Daniel, my son, I stammered. I don't want to put him in a difficult position. Sophie sighed, frowning. A son? A real son wouldn't let his mother be treated so cruelly. You need to start living for yourself, Eleanor. You've endured enough. I returned home, Sophie's words still echoing in my head. A strange feeling began to creep into my mind. What had I done wrong? How could Daniel, the son I had loved and sacrificed my whole life for, become so distant? That night, as I was cleaning up and getting ready for bed, a conversation came from the living room. The door was ajar, and I had no intention of eavesdropping, but the voice echoing from inside made me freeze. Are you sure, Pat? Is there any need to rush? Daniel's voice rang out, filled with confusion. What's the rush? Patricia's voice was cold as steel. She's 76, Daniel. We can't wait forever. She's not in her right mind. She's talking nonsense all the time. Sunrise Nursing Home is the best solution. It's easy to care for, and it gives us our own space. I was stunned. A nursing home? I was healthy. I was sane. Why a nursing home? But Mom would object vehemently, Daniel replied, hesitantly. We have to be tough, Patricia said firmly. She's a burden, no money, and she's stuck in that old house. Do you want to live here forever? We need an apartment closer to the city center. We have to sell this house. After Mom dies, we'll sell it, right? Daniel asked, his voice cold and empty, a voice I had never heard from my son. Yes, Patricia replied immediately. Or even sooner, if she goes there voluntarily. Get her in, hire someone to take care of her, visit her occasionally. I was petrified. Blood rushed to my head, my chest heaved as if a storm were raging inside. Pain, betrayal, disgust, humiliation, all of it mingled into a whirlwind. They didn't just want to get rid of me. They were plotting to push me to the edge of life so they could take this house as an inheritance ready to be transferred. I, the mother who gave birth to and raised Daniel, was now a burden, a hindrance. My eyes were red. I clenched my hands, trying not to cry. From that moment on, I was no longer the resigned mother. The pain turned to anger. The betrayal turned to hatred. On the outside, I remained calm, but inside, a plan began to germinate. I would not let them have what they wanted. Burden, dilapidated house, I muttered in my head, my voice as cold as ice. They will regret their greed and ingratitude. I will not just leave. I will leave in a way that they will never forget. I have lived my whole life being a gentle mother, but perhaps it is time for me to be a strong woman. One more time. The next morning, I noticed that Patricia had deliberately placed a folder with the name Sunrise Nursing Home on the kitchen table, a warning that couldn't be more blatant. I looked at it, then back at Patricia, who was making coffee. My eyes were no longer patient. The first confrontation was coming, and this time I would not be silent. The moment to speak had come. That evening, the atmosphere in the house was so thick it was stifling. I sat at the dining table, feeling Daniel and Patricia's scrutinizing gazes on my skin like needles. The food laid out in front of me had lost all flavor, leaving only a lingering bitterness in my throat. The entire kitchen was silent, except for the steady clinking of knives and forks. Like an artificial rhythm, I knew that the time for silence was over. It was time to face it. I slowly placed the nursing home file, which Patricia had left as a blatant reminder, on the table. I gently pushed it toward Daniel, looking at them both, my voice calm but with a cold edge. Daniel, Patricia, can you two tell me what this is? Daniel's eyes darted away. Patricia glanced at him, then back at me with a forced smile, as if she'd been caught. Oh, Eleanor, I forgot to put it away. It's just, Some information we were looking into, she evaded, but her eyes were worried and calculating. Information about moving Mom away while she is still healthy and sane? I asked, my voice echoing like a heavy church bell. There was no room for prevarication here. Daniel quickly interrupted, his voice faltering like a child caught in a lie. Mom, we're just worried about you. You're old. It's not convenient for you to live alone. You'll get better care in a nursing home. He tried to sound sincere, but I could tell it was a facade so thin that it could be torn apart with just one sharp question. I looked straight at my son, my eyes shaking slightly, but my voice unwavering. Worried? Or do you want to move me out of this house so you can sell it? To buy a bigger, more luxurious apartment closer to the center? Each word I spoke was like a scissors cutting the last remaining ties between me and them. Patricia turned to Daniel, her eyes like lightning across her face. Daniel, what did you say to her? Her voice was a sharp, reproachful hiss. No trace of her smile left. Suddenly, Daniel slammed his fist on the table, making the dishes rattle. Stop it, Mom. Patricia is just worried about you. You're always imagining the worst. It's like everyone is plotting against you. You're overreacting. His voice was harsh and cold, like a slap in the face. I sat there, frozen, as if I had just realized something painful. The son who had hugged me when he was scared, who had called me his hero, was now shouting at his mother like a troublesome stranger. My eyes were red, but not from tears, from disillusionment. The Daniel I had raised and loved to the point of exhaustion had become a selfish and distant man. My resignation shattered like glass thrown to the floor. Something hard and cold rose inside me. I stood up without another word and quietly left the table. My steps were light but decisive. When my bedroom door closed, the click sounded like a cold declaration of the end of all illusions. Sitting on the bed, I looked around the small room. Not a home, but a prison, and let my cold thoughts flow through me like a countercurrent. I asked myself, where did I go wrong? I gave everything, my love, my time, my independence, in exchange for gratitude. But what was the result? A selfish, uncaring son who saw his own mother as a burden. I taught him kindness, gratitude, I told myself, my voice cracking with disappointment. But I didn't teach him boundaries, didn't teach him that his mother wasn't his property, and now I'm paying the price. I looked out at the window, where the street lights filtered through the old trees. My eyes hardened like steel. But I will not pay with my freedom, not another second. I knew I could no longer survive in this house under the guise of love. The confrontation had been a wake-up call. My next step was to confront Patricia alone. She needed to understand one thing clearly. I was not an old woman who could be manipulated. I was Eleanor, and I was not finished. The next morning, Daniel had left for work, leaving Patricia and me alone in a house filled with tense silence, as if unspoken words were hanging between the walls. I knew this was the only moment I could have a private conversation with her, to let her know that I wasn't some confused old woman who could be manipulated. Patricia was slumped on the sofa in the living room, eyes glued to her phone, her expression haggard. Perhaps the night had not been easy for her either. I walked into the living room and stood across from her. My voice was quiet but firm, without any hesitation. Patricia, we need to talk. She looked up, a little surprised, but quickly regained her usual composure, the familiar fake smile on her lips again. Yes, Aunt Eleanor. I was just about to talk to you. What do you want in this house? I cut to the chase. Patricia sighed softly, her veneer of patience cracking, revealing her suppressed irritation. Aunt Eleanor, you have to understand that we can't live like this forever. This house is too small, too old. We need our own place. It would be best for everyone if you moved. Her tone was reasonable, as if she were proposing a humane solution. For everyone? I repeated, my eyes cold and piercing. Or for you and Daniel. You're going to put me in a nursing home so you can take over this house, right? The fake smile instantly disappeared from Patricia's face, replaced by a sharp, icy gaze. She was no longer hiding it. If you're going to say it, then I don't need to be polite. Yes, we do want you to breathe. You're a burden, financially, spatially, and mentally. You cling to the past, cling to outdated things, and refuse to change. Each word was like a cold knife, but strangely, I no longer felt pain. There was only quiet anger and a strong will in my heart. Financial burden? I almost laughed, unable to believe her naivety. Do you think I'm so poor that I have nowhere to go? Patricia sneered, her eyes flashing with sarcasm. What do you have? Daniel said you've been selling things all your life, saving every penny. Your pension isn't enough to live on. You even drive a broken car. Don't tell me you have any significant money. She didn't know who she was misjudging. Little did she know that Daniel's comment about my poverty had inadvertently become my trump card. I had to suppress a bitter smile, almost bursting out. I, Eleanor, no longer felt sad. At this moment, what I felt was clarity and a cold determination. I looked at Patricia with eyes she had never seen before. Sharp, calm, like well-honed steel. You're wrong, Patricia, I said, each word driving home the point. This house is mine, and I'm much better than the pathetic image you two paint me. You're greedy, selfish, and I won't let you have your way. Patricia's face paled for a moment, then turned red with anger. She didn't expect me to speak like that, so bluntly, without leaving any way out. She also didn't expect that I had seen through the whole plot long ago. The confrontation ended in a thick silence. Patricia could only look at me, her eyes angry and helpless. I turned and walked away, leaving her standing frozen in the living room, alone in her exposed rage. I didn't say another word. I knew it was time to face Daniel and Patricia head on, to make a decision that would change my life and theirs. They think I'm a senile old woman who doesn't know anything about money. Fine, let them think that. The price of complacency will be even more painful, I told myself. My heart was quiet now, but stronger than ever. Not a single piece of weakness remained. After the confrontation with Patricia, I knew it was time to put an end to it all. There was no more room for patience, no more empty promises, and no more foolish sacrifices. I had reached my limit. That evening, when Daniel walked into the house, I was ready for the final conversation. I invited Daniel and Patricia into the living room. The three of us sat facing each other, the air thick with tension. I sat upright, my back straight, my hands on my knees, my gaze fixed on them unwaveringly. I have made my decision, I began, my voice sharp and strangely calm. I am leaving this house. Daniel and Patricia glanced at each other. A light of relief, though poorly concealed, was evident in their eyes, as if a weight had been lifted from their chests. Mom, are you serious? Daniel asked, his voice hesitant, something between surprise and relief. Where are you going? That is none of your business, I replied, my eyes unblinking. The problem is this house. I will go, but I will not sell it to you, nor will I give it to anyone. Daniel and Patricia's faces froze for a moment. The brief moment of joy was quickly crushed. The whole plan collapsed like a sandcastle in the waves. Patricia spoke first, her voice cracking with surprise and anger. What do you mean? If you don't sell, how will we have a place to live? You promised Daniel this house. I told Daniel when he was little that this was our home, I replied, the words sinking in. But now this home is no longer mine. It has become a place where I am despised, cheated, and made a burden. And you are not worthy of that promise. Mom, why did you do this? Daniel exclaimed, his voice cracking. I am your son. Are you going to abandon me? Abandoned? I tilted my head, a bitter half smile on my lips. Who abandoned who? Who saw who as a trash bag that would sooner or later be thrown away? Who secretly planned whose death just for a house? Think about it yourselves. I looked deeply into their eyes, as if to strip away the lies they covered with their hypocrisy. And then, as if a long prepared knife strike, I coldly delivered the final blow. I will leave, but this house is still my property. When I am gone, it will be sold. You, you will not receive a penny from this. Daniel and Patricia were stunned. Their faces gradually changed from surprise to horror, then pale as wax. The neat plans for a new apartment near the city center, for a comfortable life built with my assets, now evaporated like thin smoke. They looked at me as if I were a stranger, eyes mixed with suspicion, disappointment, and an unspoken resentment. Eleanor felt a strange calm rising up in her, as if invisible chains had been removed. For the first time in years, she felt in control of her destiny. A new beginning was forming clearly in her mind. I stood up, saying nothing more. It had been said, there was no need to repeat it. That same night, I began packing up everything that belonged to me. The books that had been on my nightstand, the old faded photos, the few souvenirs that held memories. Everything was carefully packed into a suitcase. I called my longtime friend Sophie to share my decision and seek support. Sophie's voice broke on the phone, filled with emotion. "You finally did it, Eleanor. I always believed that you didn't belong in those days of resignation." I also scheduled a meeting with my attorney to update my will. It would be clear and uncontested. Daniel and Patricia would inherit nothing more than the legal minimum. They would learn a hard lesson about greed and ingratitude. While they were still confused and uncertain, I quietly searched for a new place to live. I chose an apartment at Riverview Towers in Birmingham, Alabama, a luxury condominium complex with a beautiful view of the river. It would be my new home, a place without lies, without resentment. When I saw Daniel and Patricia's eyes, I knew I had made the right choice. Revenge does not need to be loud. Sometimes it comes in absolute silence, in the proud step away from the trivial. I will rewrite my life without them. I moved into my new apartment at Riverview Towers on a sunny morning, carrying a few small suitcases filled with my most precious possessions. The apartment was spacious, modernly designed, with a balcony that opened onto the sparkling Birmingham River in the morning sun. I stood by the window, took a deep breath, and felt the cool breeze through my hair. The air is different, I told myself. No more stuffiness, no more suspicious eyes. This is my own territory. This is freedom. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the pristine air seemed to erase the resentment and melancholy that had accumulated in my chest for so many years. I knew I was ready to start a new chapter in my life. I wanted Daniel to understand what he had lost, but not through blame. I wanted him to realize his mistakes in a painful but necessary way. A few days after settling in, I decided to do something I had been secretly nurturing for a long time. That Tuesday afternoon, I called a car to a posh Porsche showroom in Birmingham. As I entered the shiny space with its gleaming cars, I was met with a slightly skeptical look from the staff. Perhaps they did not expect a gray-haired, modestly dressed old lady like me to be a potential customer, but I remained calm and polite. "What model car are you looking for?" A young, well-dressed employee approached me and asked in a professional voice. I smiled, pointing to a cherry red Porsche 911 Carrera S that stood out in the showroom. "I want to see that red 911 Carrera S. I hear it's pretty fast, right?" My voice rang out clearly, calm and confident. The clerk paused for a moment, then quickly led me to the car. I sat in the driver's seat, smelling the new leather, the shiny dashboard, and the power hidden under the hood. It was an exciting feeling, a feeling I had long forgotten. "Madam, this is our high-end sports model with outstanding performance," he said. "Would you like to take it for a test drive?" I shook my head slightly. No need. I like it already. I'll take this one. The clerk's eyes widened in obvious surprise. He couldn't believe someone like me could make a decision so quickly, and more importantly, without thinking about the price. He quickly grabbed his paperwork, while I pulled out a black card that gleamed under the showroom lights. Buying a car for me wasn't just about owning an object, it was about making a statement. At that moment, an unexpected coincidence occurred. Daniel and Patricia walked into the dealership. It seemed they were looking for a new SUV to replace their old one. They happened to be browsing the sports car section and were stunned to see me signing the paperwork for an expensive Porsche. Mom, what are you doing here? That car, Daniel stuttered, eyes wide, face pale with shock. Patricia was even more shocked. Aunt Eleanor, you really bought this? Where did you get the money? Her voice was broken with shock. I stood up, holding the new keys in my hand, smiling brightly. Looking straight into their eyes, I said, my voice calm but firm as if making a final judgment. Oh, hello, kids. I just stopped by to buy a new car to enjoy life a little. How is it? Do you think it suits me? Daniel tried to stay calm, but his voice was still trembling. But, but you said you didn't have any money. You, you lied to me? I smiled softly, a cruel yet satisfied smile. I never said I was poor. You guys assumed that. You guys thought I was a burden. While I have worked silently, saved and invested my whole life, my assets are enough to buy this entire showroom, let alone a car. You guys are wrong, very wrong. Daniel was speechless, his face as white as a sheet, not because of the truth, but because of the shame of being exposed. Patricia was shaking with anger, her eyes blazing, looking at me like a traitor. Clearly, she could not accept this reversal of power. In that moment, I felt a profound sense of liberation, as if an invisible shackle had been lifted from my neck. Buying a car was more than a hobby. It was a symbol of freedom, of dignity, and of silent but sharp revenge. I walked out of the dealership and got into my new cherry red Porsche. I started it. The engine roared proudly, like the scream of a soul awakening. I didn't look back at Daniel or Patricia, who were still standing in the doorway, looking shocked and disillusioned. I joined the traffic, headed back to my new apartment, and began my independent life, free from the bonds of exploited gratitude or emotional dependence. This isn't revenge, I thought. This is justice. I'm showing them my true worth and their bottomless greed. Behind me, I could still hear Patricia screaming, "You old bitch! You're going to pay!" But I didn't care. The roar of the Porsche drowned everything out and ushered in a new life. After the Porsche's debut at the dealership, I knew Daniel and Patricia wouldn't sit idly by. The shock was too much for them to ignore, and I was sure they would find a way to get to me soon. And they were right. A few days later, as I was sipping my morning tea on the balcony of my new apartment overlooking the river sparkling in the sunlight, the phone rang. It was Daniel. I took a deep breath before answering. "Mom, where are you? Why did you do this?" Daniel's voice was panicked, a mixture of anger and confusion. "I am where I am supposed to be," I replied calmly, "and I do what I want. What's wrong with that?" "Wrong," he almost shouted. "You said you had nothing. You worried me. And now you're buying a Porsche? What are you playing at?" "I never said I was poor, Daniel. You thought so, because you never cared enough about me to know the truth," I replied, my voice cold. "You were so busy with plans to push me out of the house, take my property. Now this surprise." Daniel was silent, unable to say anything. After a while, his voice softened, almost pleading. "Mom, come home. We really miss you. Patricia. Patricia feels sorry too. We will apologize to you." "Miss me? Regret?" I chuckled, a bitter laugh. Those words came too late, Daniel. You had your chance, but you threw it away. I hung up. I knew it wouldn't end there. They wouldn't give up on one phone call, and I was ready. Sure enough, a few days later, the apartment doorbell rang. Through my camera, I saw Daniel and Patricia standing in the doorway, tired and worried looks on their faces. I opened the door. Mom, Daniel said immediately, reaching out to hug me. I took a step back, keeping my distance. Are you okay? We were worried about you. Patricia tried to smile, but the forced smile only made her reluctance more apparent. Aunt Eleanor, we're sorry. We were wrong. Please go home. We promise we'll make things right. Sorry? I repeated, my eyes as cold as ice. Sorry for what? For seeing me as a burden? For planning to lock me up in a nursing home? Or for plotting to take over the house I've lived in all my life? Their faces paled. Daniel bowed his head, not daring to look at me. Patricia awkwardly explained, we were just thinking about you. You're old. It's not safe to live alone. We want you to have a more fulfilling life. More? When everything is taken from me? When I am treated like an old piece of furniture in my own home? I asked, my voice bitter. Are you worried about me? Or about yourselves? Daniel raised his head, his eyes filled with despair. Mom, please. I know I was wrong. Please come home. I will do everything to make you happy. I looked at my once proud son, my heart aching. The love I had for him had not disappeared, but it was clouded by disappointment and pain. Daniel, I will not return. That house is no longer mine. It has become a cage, a place where I am imprisoned by your greed. I took a deep breath and said the thing I knew would break them. And about that house, I've seen a lawyer. The will has been updated. Both Daniel and Patricia fell silent. I could see the tension in their jaws. According to the new will, you will have nothing from that house. After I die, it will be sold, and all the money will go to charity or to someone more deserving. I said each word, slowly and coldly, like a funeral bell. Daniel and Patricia's expressions changed instantly. Their faces froze, their eyes filled with panic. Their castle, built on greed, had collapsed in an instant. No way, Patricia screamed, her voice cracking with despair. You can't do this. You're Daniel's mother. I can, I replied firmly, and I have. You chose the path of betrayal, and this is the price. Daniel slumped into his chair, holding his head. He was no longer the arrogant man, but a lost child, left penniless by his own greed. I looked at them one last time, a last look without any love. I used to forgive, to be patient, but not anymore. I have regained my freedom, my dignity, the things they tried to bury. You may go, I said, and opened the door wide. They walked away like shadows, lost, defeated. As the door closed behind them, I felt myself calm down. A deep sense of peace washed over me. The war was over, and this time I had won. After my final confrontation with Daniel and Patricia, it was as if a weight had been lifted from my chest that had been weighing me down for years. No more guilt, no more regret. Just a sense of lightness, as if I had unlocked a long sealed door into a new world, one without control, lies, or repression. A whole new chapter of my life opened up, bright, serene, and hopeful. I began to enjoy every moment in my new apartment. Every morning, I woke up to the soft yellow sunlight filtering through the curtains, the birds chirping in harmony with the rhythm of the city. I made a pot of herbal tea, sat on the balcony watching the river shimmering under the sunlight, the boats gently drifting by like thoughts no longer entangled. No more judgment, no more rules of silence, no more feeling like I was an extra. This was my true space, where I could be my true self. I poured my heart and soul into redecorating the apartment the way I had always wanted it. Bright, light colors, a breath of freedom. I placed potted plants on the balcony, hung landscape paintings that I had loved for a long time but had never displayed. Every corner had a personal touch, something I had lost in the old house, where I had been marginalized. I bought a new tea set, collected a few special novels, and spent hours reading, reflecting, and healing my soul. I also opened my heart to the outside world, starting to mend relationships. The first person I sought out was Sophie, an old friend who had never turned her back on me. We met for coffee, went for a walk, or simply sat and talked by candlelight. Sophie was still my strong support. See, Eleanor, I always told you, you deserve to be happy, not resigned. She smiled gently on a sunny afternoon. Not only Sophie, I gradually became friends with my neighbors at Riverview Towers. Independent, experienced women who understood the value of freedom and self-respect. We organized afternoon teas, watched movies together, learned to draw or joined yoga classes. Relationships without obligations, without calculations, only sharing and empathy. I signed up for a flower arrangement class, an old hobby I had given up. I learned to paint with watercolors. The strokes were still clumsy, but filled with life and hope. The old house on Oakwood Street still stood, but it was no longer my home. I worked with a real estate agent to sell it, a process that went quickly because of its prime location and reasonable price. I didn't show up on the day the transaction was completed. I didn't want to look back. I just got the notice and then quietly closed the case. I gave all the money from the sale to a charity that supports orphans and single women, as I had told Daniel and Patricia. I wanted it to go to people who really needed it, not to those who were only interested in greed. I don't know, and I don't want to know, how Daniel and Patricia reacted when they learned that the house had changed hands and that they hadn't received a penny. I cut off all contact. I changed my phone number and told the building management not to let them in if they showed up. They had chosen their path, and I had, in the end, chosen mine. Now my days are filled with peace. I drive around the city in my cherry red Porsche, feeling the cool breeze on my cheeks and my heart beating freely. No one is holding me back. No longer feeling suffocated. No longer considered a burden. I have regained control of my life, and I am living it fully, deeply, and happily. Sometimes I still look at the old photo of Daniel as a baby. His eyes were wide, innocent, and full of hope. I still love my son. That love has never gone away, but it has been put in its place, along with a bitter truth. Sometimes one has to learn to accept that not everyone deserves your kindness, even if they are blood relatives. This lesson I paid for most of my life to learn, but I learned it, and most importantly, I survived. My life now feels like a bird that has just escaped from its cage, flying freely in the vast sky. No longer bound by prejudice, no longer burdened by toxic relationships or harsh expectations of others. I have found myself a resilient, independent, and vibrant Eleanor. On a sunny morning, Sophie and I set off on a trip we had long dreamed of, a cruise along the California coast. The cherry red Porsche glided smoothly along winding coastal roads, where the sun shimmered on the windshield and the salty ocean breeze whispered in our ears. We passed through sleepy towns, stopped at quaint little cafes, and enjoyed meals filled with the flavors of the sea. Every afternoon, we found a deserted beach, sat on the soft white sand, and watched the sunset slowly sink into the red horizon, burning the ocean in the last light of day. Sophie tilted her head to look at me, her eyes sparkling with affection. You see, Eleanor, there are still so many wonderful things to live for and explore. You were right to not give up. I returned the smile with a genuine one, not forced, not defensive. Yes, Sophie, I've learned that sometimes the greatest liberation comes from letting go of something you thought you couldn't lose. I thought that house meant everything to me, but it turns out that freedom is the thing worth keeping. We arrived in San Francisco, a city of rolling hills and a red bridge spanning the bay. We wandered through quaint streets, browsed colorful shops, and enjoyed coffee at small cafes overlooking the clear blue water. I suddenly felt young again, as if every cell in my body was awakening, eager to experience and love life more than ever. Standing on a hilltop, looking down at the glittering city and the endless ocean, I suddenly remembered the dark days when I lived with Daniel and Patricia. Memories of fear, abandonment, and betrayal flooded back. But now it was all like an old film reel, watched, closed, a painful but necessary lesson to become who I am today. I suddenly realized that life is not always a bed of roses. There are times when we are forced to face injustice, pain, and loss. But what makes us human is how we face and overcome it. We can fall apart, or we can choose to stand up, steady and calm. I chose to stand up. I chose to defend myself, to reclaim my freedom and happiness. And I won, not through revenge, but through peace of mind, a quiet but complete victory. Sophie, I said softly, as if whispering into the ocean breeze, I used to think I would end my life in silence and self-pity, but now I know that if that day comes, I will go free and happy. Sophie took my hand, her eyes shining like the sun. And that's the best part, Eleanor. The trip ended, but the new journey of my life continued. Returning to my beloved apartment, I felt my heart filled with gratitude and happiness. I continued to participate in community activities, meet friends, and indulge in new hobbies. I no longer feared old age or the darkness of loneliness. As long as I could live my life in my own way, as long as each day started with a smile, life was still full of meaning. I understand that happiness is not something beyond our reach, nor is it something that others can give us. It is something that already exists in our hearts. It is inner peace, freedom of thought, and the ability to love ourselves.